Well, I've been working in the financial services industry for the last 20 years and had that interest when I was in the NFL. Got my securities license when I was in Seattle and did work with some companies in the off season. But I didn't go back to it until '95. I got out of the NFL after the '85 season and did a few different jobs. Tried to do coaching and sort of teaching. One time was owned a part owner in a trucking company, and then prior to getting into this field full time in '95, I was with the University of Tulsa in their athletic program as like an assistant AD, doing marketing and advertising type things.
Okay. I think one of the big things I've learned in my master's program is just the transition that athletes have from playing a sport to the real world, that everybody calls it. But it seems like a pretty seamless transition for you. How was that or how'd that transition go for you?
Well, I've been doing this 20 years, so is this really where I should be and what I'm best at? It's provided a living. It's something I like. The transition right after the NFL was very difficult because I tried a number of things and wasn't in any of them for very long. Even had a stint on a sports like talk radio. So that was a difficult transition to figure out what it is you really want to do and what you had some talents in. Because a lot of people want to hire you. Maybe they see you as someone that is a known figure in the community. So when I was in Seattle, and most people wanted you to be in sales or something like that. So I had opportunities there, and I tried and bounced around. So seamless transition, no. When I came back to Tulsa in 1990, so I lived in Seattle from when I got out of the University of Tulsa in '77 up until '90, and I played from '77 through the 1985 season. And even though I got traded to Pittsburgh in '84, I still came back and maintained a home in Seattle. And then after I retired, or after they retired me, after 1985, I stayed in Seattle, went back there and finished up my degree because I hadn't done that during my time at Tulsa, and then tried to get into the work world and do stuff. In my day, we didn't make much money, so guys even worked in the off season to try to supplement their low NFL income. And I saw that a lot in my early years, because in the '70s, actually, I think the average salary when I started was $25,000 a year back in the mid '70s, and I don't know what it was at the end, but it had gone up quite a bit. So there wasn't off-season conditioning. It was on your own when I first started. We didn't even have a trainer, a strength and conditioning coach in Seattle until 1979 maybe. And because most guys, like I said, when the season's over, they went back to their hometown or their college, wherever, and worked. And then as that started developing, more people would stay in town and work out and do that program.
Okay. And then, so take me through to you talked a little about, you started born and raised in Pennsylvania, went to college at Tulsa, ended up with the Seahawks. So kind of, what was that, just the moving around that you had? Did you enjoy it? What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was fine. I grew up moving around as a youngster. I grew up in I was born in Pennsylvania and then moved to California with my family, and then lived there maybe 7 or 8 years. But during that time, my mother and father split up, and so my mother raised us 5 kids by herself since I was 5 years old or so, and we went back to Pennsylvania in maybe when I was 8 or 9, and to get near her family. So I was used to moving because we moved a number of times. So that wasn't as difficult. So, you know, coming to Tulsa, it was pretty far away from home, but, you know, I'd lived in California. Wasn't as far as that. And then going to Seattle, which is real far away from Pittsburgh, you know, but I didn't mind that. It was something I had done, and change seemed to be something that I could handle.
Okay. And take me through your time in Seattle. Just what's for people who have never played in NFL or played football in general, what was an NFL locker room like? What was an NFL team like during your stint there?
Well, you know, the money, like I said, the money wasn't great. You know, I was drafted in the first round in 1977 by the Seahawks, and so I got a lot. Press was a lot greater, even though Seattle's not the largest city out there, or largest media type city, but it was something I wasn't used to. Being a lineman, I was an offensive tackle at the University of Tulsa, and stayed in that position in Seattle. So, you know, as a lineman, you don't get talked to a lot, and so that was an eye-opening thing. And then, you know, the fans were crazy. You know, University of Tulsa is a small private school, mid-level Division I program, and, you know, we averaged maybe upper teens into the 20s. And, you know, everybody in Tulsa, most people in Tulsa like either OU or OSU. So you weren't like idolized in Tulsa. It was like, oh, it's a second-rate team, or, you know, they're you know, junior college or whatever. You know, at least that's the feeling I often got, because we weren't an OU or an OSU. You know, so then going to Seattle and being on the team for the whole Northwest, you know, because football was new up there. I mean, the Seahawks were, when I got there, was second-year franchise. So it was quite a change to be in that type of setting, and then playing in the NFL, where not a whole lot of people get that opportunity. It was a lot of fun, but it's a business, and there's a business side to it that is not fun. You see people come and go every year that you don't understand why, or, you know, if you look at who they should have kept and who they should have let go, it doesn't always add up. But people make decisions, and you got to live with them. So you try to develop friendships and relationships, but, you know, guys are coming and going, that sometimes that's difficult. But, you know, there's usually a core group of people that stay on a team for a while if they're starters. And of course, when I played, there was no real free agency. So the only way you're going is if they cut you and said you can go wherever you want, or if they traded you. It wasn't play a few years and then you have every team in the league bidding on you. So that was different. You know, it wasn't as commercialized. You know, that happened, that transition happened. You know, at the end of my career, things were different, but not anything like they are now. Mm-hmm. So.
How long did you play with the Seahawks?
I was there in my 8th year. I got traded. So the middle of my 8th year, I got traded to Pittsburgh, and finished my 8th year in Pittsburgh, and then started my 9th year in training camp in Pittsburgh. Got hurt, and then when I was better, I got basically released, and the Jets picked me up on waivers. So within that 24-hour period of being released, teams can claim you. So the Jets wanted me, so I went to New York, and then got hurt in the first preseason game. This was during the preseason, and I was on crutches for 3 weeks or so. So I was on the team on injured reserve, and then when I got better, they really didn't. They had their line set, so I actually was released in the middle of that year. So technically, I was never on the active roster in New York, but it's another year that I got on my NFL pension. So 9 years, in the league, and then I just moved back to Seattle and lived there until 1990, and then moved to Tulsa.
Okay. What was you talked about how there wasn't too much. The trainers wasn't necessarily there. The off-season workouts weren't necessarily a requirement like they are now.
Yeah.
What was the level of I guess, commitment by guys to a team in the off season, or what was the expectations, I guess?
Well, there wasn't really that, and I'm talking about Seattle because that's where most of my career was, almost, a trade in the middle of my 8th year. So and Seattle probably was one of the last teams to really get a strength and conditioning coach. So when I got there, there's 2 trainers. And the trainers, help you if you're hurt. And actually the trainers were the ones that were sort of, if you were there, they would come out in the off season, they would help run you through, but they'd have, I know the first year they gave everybody a little booklet, and this is your off-season workout program, and it was a real thin little book. It just had different kind of drills and real basic. But there was not, they never monitored you, and then there was guys that stayed. Like I stayed in Seattle from the beginning, just to get familiar with the town, just because that's where I was playing and I wanted to be part of that community. And so I stayed there, and we worked out. There were a group of guys. We'd go into the facility because we had the weights and in the field where you can go out and run and do whatever. If you wanted to watch film, you could, but that wasn't. It was nowhere sophisticated because they had to. That was back when they had the reels, on the film on the reels, and you'd have to thread it through the thing, and you run it back, and it would break, and you'd have to get some tape out and tape it up. And so, in the off season, it wasn't that. Some guys may have done something, but most of the guys, because of the salary was so low, guys went and worked, or went back to school and finished their degree or did whatever. They didn't stay around there. They didn't have the time to do things. So, I worked in some different jobs in the off season. I didn't have to work, but you're always thinking about what are you going to do when you're done, because you weren't making enough money to retire after 5 years or so many years in the NFL. Nowadays, these guys, they play 2 or 3 or 4 years or just sign a contract and go to camp. Some of them are set if they're a first-round draft pick. So I was first round, 14th player chosen. I'd had probably just by signing a contract, I'd have been set for life with multi-millions. So it was a different deal back then. And then, so the requirements weren't much because they really couldn't expect you. And some teams may have been different. Some teams probably more progressive. I don't know who they were, but we finally got a strength and conditioning coach, and more guys stayed in the off season. And then they tried to, if you were around, the strength and conditioning guy would take you through stuff, but it was nothing formal, nothing required. I think all the way through my career, there was never, for those 9 years, there was never an off-season requirement. I think the most they had is a couple teams might have did a mini camp and wanted you to come back, because they always did a rookie mini camp after the draft. And so the requirements weren't there. So, people didn't work out as much. The guys coming out of college, they were always better conditioned, stronger, because colleges, the best schools, the OUs and Nebraska and USC and all the top schools, they had a lot of money in their program. They had the best, strength and conditioning coaches, the best facilities. So when that's coming out of college and those kids are getting bigger, then the NFL sort of says, okay, we need it. So they would hire maybe the college strength and conditioning guys. And so the workouts, the off-season programs started growing, but never, I don't know what year you'd say they became mandatory, but it wasn't in my career that anything was ever mandatory in the off-season.
Okay. And you talked a little early about just, the main topic that my documentary is about, just concussions in football. And just when you had that kind of little of trainers and that little strength and conditioning, do you think that affected how maybe more likely players were to get injured and that kind of thing? If you look at it and if you did a study on injuries and see if there was more then when they weren't working out as much in the off season, and as you work out more in the off season, has it gone down? I would venture to guess that it really hasn't changed much. Injuries are part of the game. I mean, you get in a certain position and somebody hits you a certain way, whether it's a knee. I've had about 4 or 5 operations over the years, and you get your foot in some kind of situation, or just guys get hurt making a cut.
just a running back makes a cut and his knee gives. So I don't think it's decreased the injury. I think what workouts do is it shortens the length maybe because you work and get those muscles. Otherwise, sometimes, like I had a knee injury in college, they put me in a cast from my hip to my ankle for 6 weeks. That was the protocol. So when you got out of that cast, your leg was like skin and bones. The muscle had all atrophied, so it took a lot longer. And then at the end of my college career, Steve Largent has a knee injury similar to what I had in spring ball before his senior year. They put him in a cast, and it was a hinge cast. They put a hinge on it, so he could move his knee, so he didn't lose as much in the muscle there, and he could recover a lot quicker. He was ready to play that senior year, and so I mean, things changed dramatically over those years, and so it's but I think that you still see injuries today. I mean, I don't know that it's that much different, but I just think maybe the only thing is that you can recover quicker because of all the constant and more advanced, medical stuff.
Okay. And then one of the kind of the key pieces that I've really found in my studies, just on this topic in general, is just how much the contact in football compared to other sports is so great, and each play there's contact somewhere.
Yeah.
Just how much of an understanding of risks do football players kind of accept in playing the game, and especially at the NFL where the plays at the highest level? How much is it to where you're not necessarily thinking about it, but it is something that injury is a possibility at really any time?
Well, I think if you've had an injury, you understand that it could happen to you at any time. Some people are fortunate and go through many years without anything serious. You're always playing with some kind of ding or some issue, and you do that. Through my 9 years, I did that most of those years, and not until my 8th year did I have an injury that kept me out. I've had one injury prior to the middle of my 8th year when I got traded to Pittsburgh, and I had one injury that kept me out one game, and I didn't miss any other games outside of that. You just played. I played with casts on my hands and ribs, protectors, and getting shot up before the game to minimize the pain. And I think that still happens, but it's injuries are going to happen, and so I mean the concussion thing. There was really, unless you were dinged so bad that you came off the field and you were like talking nonsense, and that's usually when you got attention. And if you weren't, if you were just woozy or whatever, or nobody ever talked about it, or nobody ever went to the trainer and said, hey, at least that I know. I mean, somebody may have, but for the most part, you get in the NFL and there's a saying, you get hurt, you lose your job. Well, so with that in the back of your mind, you don't want to be hurt. And if you are hurt, you're not part of the team, if you're not going out and practicing with them, and it's not something you want. I mean, it's not a good feeling, but outside of that, the more important thing is you're not going to be around very long if you don't get better. And so the concussion thing, that's part of, you're going to get dinged every once in a while, or get knocked out, or and if they don't see it and you're not coming off the sideline crazy, then in my experience, I never once told the trainers or the doctors that I ever had any issue, but I've had a number of issues. The worst one would be that I got knocked out, because I know I blacked out, and I don't know how long it was, but it wasn't that long that I was able to get up, and there were people still, getting back to the huddle or whatever. And I know on that specific time that I was like, I didn't know. First of all, I didn't walk towards my huddle, and one of my teammates said, "Here, where are you going?" and I went over there and we went through another play. I think it was maybe third down or whatever, and I couldn't really comprehend what play was being called, and so my instinct was, hey, I just got to go, just block who's ever over me. And the old saying that coaches would say, hey, when in doubt, fire out. So you just get who's over you. And that play, I just went through that, and then I think we went off the field after that, didn't convert into a first down. So that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But there's many times that I've been woozy and hitting the head and been, you get a knee to your head or whatever. Back when I played, the beginning of my career, the head slap was allowed. So a head slap was a defensive lineman swinging his clubbed, hand, arm up the side of your head, and they outlawed that in the middle sometime in the either early 80s or late 70s. So, they were always trying to hit you in the head, but once that got outlawed, then it was just a matter of, you put your head in there to block a lot, even though it's not ideal. But when you're going after someone, you want to move them. The head is a good way to start. So I think people try to do more technique now, and now there's rules against using your crown or your helmet. So there wasn't any rules, and people people trying to get a big hit, and so those things happen. And I was many times had, what they call stingers, or just get dinged. You get hit and you just feel electrical shock down your neck into your arm. But nothing ever that kept me from going on in the game. And then I didn't ever have any residual things, because I know guys were, there were guys that got dinged pretty bad, or, hit pretty bad, and had, they were off the sideline, they couldn't even talk, or they were talking crazy stuff, and the trainer would be there with them, doctor, and they'd be looking, follow my finger, how many fingers do I have up, and doing those things, and asking them a question, and they're like, talking about Disneyland or something like that. So as long as they were giving them those answers, but once they straightened up and gave them a good answer and they felt comfortable, they were back in the game. So there was no protocol that if you had some sort of concussion, it was just, they wanted you to be able to operate. They knew it was dangerous if you're out there and you don't know what you're doing and you're just sort of, singing or, yeah. So that was the only kind of protocol we had was, if you were in that capacity, then they wouldn't let you on the field. Okay. And even if you were and guys knew it, they would try to fake it, or I don't know how you can fake that, because I was never to that point. But that was, through my whole career, I never heard of any protocol or saw anything other than, what I just explained there.
And you've never were diagnosed with a concussion?
How would you be diagnosed with a concussion if there's no protocol to even? The only way that you would be is if you were in that situation where the trainer and the doctor's talking to you and trying to, how many fingers do I have up? What's the capital of Washington, or things like that. Who was the first president of the United States? I mean, you ask those questions and they can't answer. Now, so then somebody may have went on his medical record or some kind of comments. But I've been dinged and knocked out once before, and just many times been woozy, but I never reported anything like that.
So really, when you played, there was no such thing as being diagnosed with a concussion, really? Or there wasn't really, like you said, there wasn't the protocol, so there necessarily wasn't, people might have written down on the record, hey, couldn't tell me what this was. Yeah, so never was told.
Yeah, but if you talk to those guys that had go through that process, because I've seen it many times, I don't know how many times, but I would see it on the sideline because somebody got really dinged real bad. Yeah. Either knocked out or they just came off the field because they got hit wrong, and they're just like seeing stars, and they can't, comprehend or carry on a conversation. Then they keep them out. So that may go on the record books as a concussion. I don't know. Mm-hmm. You'd have to check the records from the 70s and 80s or before.
Okay. And then take me through, did you ever, like you said, you were dinged up once in a while. What was it like just on the line going up? Because you always going to block somebody, so you always have contact every play. What was that like, and just the physical toll that kind of took?
Well, that's more on your most of your other parts of your body. You know, some people use their head a lot. You know, if you're pass blocking, you shouldn't be using your head because you should be using your hands. So, but sometimes if someone's bull rushing, you got to get you got to somehow get lower, and sometimes if you see someone coming at you, you might use your head to get under them. So a lot of the times, you know, there's always contact, you know, because you're blocking somebody or someone's trying to get away from you, but, you know, you're getting hit on other parts of your body. Your head, you know, if you're out leading a sweep or coming out on a, you know, trap block or something like that, you know, usually, you know, your head might get involved. The head slap, you know, early on when guys were pass rushing, they used the head slap, so you get dinged there. You know, once in a while you catch a knee or something like that into your head or your, so how many times you get hit in the head, I don't know. They have studies on that and say approximately, I think there was a lot more in the older days, back in my days, because there was no rule or, you know, about, you know, I mean, naturally they'd say keep your head up, because if you put your head down, you know, you can, you know, break your neck. So you always had to try to think about keeping your head up there. But, you know, a lot of times when things happen so fast and people are moving at, you know, pretty, you know, quick speed, that sometimes your head just, you can't get it out in the right position or, you know, do the proper technique.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that concussions really weren't known about when you played? They were really not too much was known about them?
I would say that, yeah, I mean, it just wasn't something they talked about. I'm sure because of the cases that I tell you, when the doctors were there and the trainers were there and not letting guys back in, whatever they called that, whether they called it a concussion or some kind of head injury, or I don't know what that was, how that was labeled, but it wasn't ever talked about as, you know, I mean, people, you know, injuries were talked about and knees and whatnot, but there wasn't much discussion or any that I can remember on concussion, getting your head out of there. And it was, you know, don't use your head or you break your neck. That was more of why you didn't want to be using your head. And if you used it, you had to make sure you had it in a certain position and trying to use your face mask in the, you know, up here instead of, you know, the top of it.
Was there any ever moments like a teammate where you remember that they took a really good hit and you were like that, just looking back on it, you were like, man, that had to be something? Yeah.
Now, there's a quarterback that was a backup quarterback for us. His name is Sam Atkins. He played at Wichita State, so I played against him in college. I didn't know him then, but we were rookies together in Seattle, and he played for the Seahawks for, I don't know, 5-6 years as a backup. And one time he got in a game, I think we were at Mile High in Denver, and this guy's a big guy, and so he wasn't afraid to tuck the ball and run. And this one time he was running outside to try to get some extra yards, and the guy hardly ever, you know, went down, and the coaches would always teach, hey, you know, don't, you know, they're near you, go down. And so he tried to do a slide, and he slid way too late, right before the guy was ready to hit him. And the guy, so he just slid and was exposed. And the guy came up, hit him with his helmet right under his chin, and you could see his head snap back. And he was out for a little bit. And that was, you know, so that's a different kind of, you know, he wasn't hit on the head, but I'm sure that motion, you know, concussions are, from what I understand, caused when your brain hits the side of your head, right? And so I'm thinking his brain moved pretty big because his head just really snapped. That guy snapped it back, and it just looked really bad. But he got up and he was okay, from what I understood. Of course, he didn't have to play the next game, or he wasn't our starter. So, well, that was nasty looking.
Yeah. That is, I mean, that's exactly right. The way you described it, hitting up against the head, it's the repeated motion against the head. One of the things I thought was interesting when I talked to Dr. Roglio at Michigan, he talked to me how if you have, because their NCAA is currently doing a 3-year study, and their current numbers have women's hockey and women's soccer as the highest impact concussion rates in
Mhm.
in collegiate sports. But he talked about if you have a female soccer player going up for a header
Mhm.
and going up against a member, like a opposing member of the other team, and gets elbowed in the head, gets a concussion, and a guy going across the middle in a football game who gets decked after catching a pass, the concussion is the same. There's no severity or anything. A concussion is just a concussion. So I thought that was interesting just to hear that. But so it seems like he got dinged pretty good, but perhaps instances where you felt dinged or another of your teammates felt dinged, the general consensus was that whatever goes on in the brain is all due to that breakdown or the hit to the head. Did you have a lot of hits to the head just in terms of when you were blocking or just the physical play on the line? Take me into the line a little more.
No, you'd be using your head, so it depends what kind of blocker you are. It depends on what they teach, because technically, a lot of times they teach, using, I don't know if it's still done, but I mean, an ideal block might be if the running back's going to your left and you're trying to take a step that way and cut off the guy in front of you, you don't go straight at him because you got to get that angle, right? So a lot of times with angles, it's hard to go hit somebody with your head. And so you're using your shoulders and, taking the proper step. But there's many times that, the ball's coming behind you and that guy's not doing anything. So you want to try to move him. So you got to use more in your hands, that you got to get low and you got to get your head in there. And so, but there's not that far you're going. That's not the worst, but and if you say the doctor said just getting hit in your head, there's impact, but the greater impact is when you're pulling out and you're trapping somebody, and there's a big 300-plus pound defensive lineman that doesn't know what's going on, and he's standing there, and all of a sudden he turns and sees you coming, and you got to move him out of the hole. So that's a collision there. And if you sometimes get your head down in there, you try to get underneath his, leverage, maybe hit him in the chin, and a lot of times as you got your helmet going that way, you want to, zero in and knock him off out of the hole. So you got to have some force and be going with some speed. But a lot of times, you're just sort of grappling with guys in there because your helmets are almost, you got a ball length between the linemen. So there's a lot of, just like wrestling type stuff for people to get any kind of speed to get a hit. You have to be either working on long angles or you're going after a linebacker, or you're coming around and doing a cross block or something, and you have some room to get out and pick up some speed. So most of the time in the line, it's not those collisions you see like linebackers, you see running backs, you see defensive backs, because they're coming from a distance to meet somebody. And the lineman will get involved if we're pulling out for a play. But most of the stuff's short, distance. Actually the time that I got knocked out, I was on a play and I'd already made my block and I was trying to cut him off and I was on the ground, and what happened was a linebacker come flying across and he kneed me in my head. I was down there and he hit his knee as he's trying to run, and it was like I was out, And so, for the most part, the hard hits like that are not very often, but there's a lot of, you're in there banging away and it's just not at a great distance where you have high impact. But if the doctor says, hey, any impact, you're going to have some impact. So it's, you're getting hit mostly every play unless you're way on the backside and you're just trying to cut off and you're running after people.
Okay. How important is it? I guess I'll take this route first. Just watching football today, has it changed significantly in terms of like the speed of the game and the guys who play it? Are guys quicker today, or does it seem pretty similar?
Well, people would argue that there is, but I know there was guys that could run 4.2s or whatever, whatever the fast speeds are. There were guys that were strong and big you know, because we did lift weights, you know, even though we might have not been on the kind of regimen that, and there were guys that were pretty darn strong. So overall, the numbers might look better overall, but you know, you always find guys that do it themselves, they work hard, or they're focused on being bigger. The guys weren't as big back then, at least the linemen, but there was defensive backs, linebackers, they were as big as they are now and as fast. You know, the linemen to me are just so overweight. But that's not, you know, I mean, I don't think you get hurt more because you're so bigger. You know, you're just still wrestling on the line of scrimmage and trying to cut people off. And so I wouldn't want to give up the fact that they're better, but that's the argument that they are. But I've played against some great athletes that were, you know, I mean, Joe Green, you know, and some of the Steeler guys. In Seattle, our defense was a little bit smaller than that, but you know, we had a bunch of guys that were tough. You know, to me, it just seems like these guys today, if they're so big, they don't move as quick, although some of them move pretty quick. But so size is not necessarily better. But I've seen some collisions from college at Tulsa and guys that were headhunters and, you know, were trying to take people out. And, you know, so it's been a violent game, and it sort of still is. They're just trying to control the violence.
When you were in Seattle, or sorry, Pittsburgh, was Joe Green there?
No, he had retired.
Okay.
You know, the remnants, you know, that was 1984 that I got traded there. And Terry Bradshaw had just retired in training camp. He was actually trying to play that year, but he had some elbow problems. So there was no defensive lineman left, you know, the Joe Greens, the Dwight White, the, you know, L.C. Greenwood and Ernie Holmes, they were all gone. The linebackers, Jack Lambert was still there. There was a couple defensive backs that were still there. Donnie Shell and John Stallworth, the receiver, was still there. So there were some of the old remnant Steelers, but they were all mostly young guys.
One of the big pieces that I've kind of watched and studied a lot is Frontline.
Yeah.
Did a study, and Joe Green was kind of their big prominent piece to that, just in that, and it was just interesting to see the differences that they thought they would see compared to what they didn't. I mean, it was astronomical. That's one of the things I've kind of always forgot to ask people, because I always forget. Headhunter, you brought up headhunters. How big of a difference is it between people who really work on technique versus people who are headhunters? Do headhunters still use technique in their style, or are they just more about being physical and kind of scaring people? And how big of technique comes into play with injuries?
You know, I mean, headhunters are, you know, it's just a term used because maybe they have a lot of big hits and they're out, you know, maybe looking for a big hit more than they are trying to be in the right position. And, you know, and so, you know, when you're doing stuff like that, you can hurt your defense because you have an assignment, you have an area that you're supposed to be in. Some of those guys are looking for those opportunities to make a big hit and either put someone out or get on the highlight reel on ESPN. So, you know, but some people just play hard, and that's, you know, they're so strong, and that's how, you know, that's their MO. And, you know, usually it's a strong safety. I mean, free safeties you don't use because they have more responsibility. They can't, you know. But, you know, all those defensive backs can make some big hits on people, and some of them have tried to do that more than go for the ball. You know, linebackers, you know, people, you know, that have and get a big, nice running start to go hit somebody. Defensive linemen, usually you don't because they're not going so far, but they get free in the backfield, and I've seen them clobber some quarterbacks pretty bad too.
Okay. And then today, I mean, obviously concussions and the research that's behind them has grown astronomically over the years, especially since when you've played and, you know, tell me the stories of how you get dinged up, but, you know, they send you right back in. And today it's almost just, it's a process. It's guys they feel anything, tell anybody they could be out for an extended period of time. The conflict in my piece is not necessarily revealing an injury. I guess looking back on your playing days and maybe being dinged up and seeing guys that were dinged up, and if you said you didn't tell trainers or anything like that, but knowing what you know today and the process that goes through, do you think it would be important for an athlete to talk about the injury with a trainer, let them know, or do you like you said that the saying you have, you get hurt, don't play. Or,
you get hurt, you lose your job.
Yeah. Is that a mentality that everybody has?
Sure. Well, that's the facts of life. I mean, do you know of any place, or have you ever heard anything where they try to protect injuries from happening more now than they ever have? So they're watchful of that. But once you're injured, you're expendable. And if you can't get productive soon, or they might let you, you might get put on injury reserve and you're out for the year. But that's part of, then you become, might be labeled as, gets hurt or whatever, which is totally ridiculous because an injury can happen to anybody at any time. Some people fight through them more than others and won't disclose, or because they don't want to be on the bench. They don't want to have that possibility that they'll be gone. So I don't know how much. I think they're watching them a lot closer now, and they see anything happen. Somebody gets up slow or something. I'm sure the trainers, and they might even have concussion watchers on the sideline that, they probably go talk to them right away if they see that. I just think they're more aware of those things, and they're trying to protect themselves, really, just like, the medical profession. There's so many lawsuits out there, and they want to protect themselves and make sure that they're doing the right thing, and they have protocol that they're paying attention to those things.
Do you think maybe there's a difference between a college athlete versus an NFL athlete in terms of how they maybe disclose injury? Perhaps, a college athlete who necessarily is at the hands of an institution versus an NFL athlete who it's their job, like you said. And do you think maybe there's a difference there in kind of the relativity of who maybe should disclose injury versus who probably should but isn't going to?
Yeah, well, I think the difference from what I saw, and I think it's still today, when you're in college, there's not a whole bunch of people that can take your job. I mean, there might be somebody, a young person behind you that can step in. So I think there's a little bit more freedom, when you get hurt, to make sure you're okay. And so you don't have the threat of you're going to lose your job. I mean, it's possible. But in the NFL, there's so many good athletes and so many good players, and they just keep coming in. In college, you got a limited amount of players, and usually your starters are your best players, and after that, usually it drops off a little bit. So from that standpoint, I think the players don't have as much pressure to make sure they're staying in there. They want to make sure they're productive, because the last thing you want to do is go out there and not be productive and that be on the film, and they say, it's a bad film for you. You don't want people looking at that. But when you're in the NFL, it's survival. And I think still to this day, I mean, there's so many guys and there's so few players, starters, that, you think twice before you want to go, take care of something maybe the way it should be taken care of.
Mm-hmm. And then I think a big trait that I've seen kind of just in general is just being headstrong. And that almost seems like a trait of just about every football athlete I've ever talked to, just having that mentality, especially when I talked to Clint. He got concussed 3 times before, knew it was a concussion, didn't tell anybody, went in and played the game because he was scared he was going to lose his job. How big of a is the mentality behind an athlete just saying, hey, this is my job, I'm not going to lose it? Mm-hmm. Just the mentality that they have behind playing the game and playing something that doing what they love.
Yeah, well, I think it's a big part. To get to be really good, you have to go beyond your athletic ability sometimes. Some people are so gifted athletically, and I've seen them, and they don't do anything. I mean, they're not very smart, or they don't study as much or whatever. And those guys will fall by the wayside. But, to be the best, I mean, you got to not only have the physical tools, but you have to have the mental, capacity to do that. So, so you're trained to be mentally tough. not only physically but mentally. And you want to win at all costs, you know, so to speak. You want to do whatever you can and have to do to win. And like Clint talked about, you know, you don't want to lose your job. You want to be, you know, I mean, toughness is part of survival, being tough and not, you know, folding when the going gets tough. I mean, that's what you're taught, right? I mean, in anything, even in your business or whatever, if you don't have to be an athlete to learn, you know, the strong survive. And when that happens, you're not always taking care of, you know, yourself or other people. You know, you're so focused on what you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have time for two more
Sure.
questions? Okay. You said you had two sons. Can you just talk a little bit about them, maybe the role you played with in football decisions and that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I had two boys, and one of the things that I wanted to do was make sure I was involved in their upbringing and in their lives. Not having a father and, you know, growing up without any influence, you know, I wanted to be that for my boys. So actually, I got out of the athletic administration position, you know, instead of trying to become an AD, and went into the business world just because I knew I had a more flexible schedule, and I wanted to be able to be the coach to my boys in those young years. And the toughest thing is to see your kid get hurt, you know, and having played, you know, tackle football, full contact football in the grade school age, which I really didn't want to do that, but you know, my wife and I talked, and everybody else around us was doing it, and you know, and to me, I wanted to go out there and make sure they weren't in no Oklahoma drills, you know, just or in these bull in the ring drills that, you know, the little kid or the inferior athlete is going to get hurt. So I wanted to make sure I was around that, because I've been around a lot of crazy coaches that, you know, that think that, you know, well, that's their mentality, and they want to, you know, you got to be tough, and you got to, you know, we want to put you through some grueling stuff. And, you know, I wasn't easy on them, but it's just a game, and they're kids, and you want them to have fun and learn it. So I wanted to be involved in that. But, you know, the injury thing it's always, you know, a little bit excruciating to see someone get hurt, and then especially if it's your own boy and you got to run out in the field and see what's going on. So from that aspect, I would rather them not be in sports that are that physical, but I let them play as long as they wanted. But, you know, I always got them, you know, they learned how to golf. You know, I tried to teach them a little tennis, you know, but so there's other sports out there that you can have fun in, and it's not as tough on your body. So I did that through, you know, junior high, and was involved in their lives, and then when they went to high school. But, you know, when my older son was so little, you know, at 5'5", 120 pounds, going into sophomore year at one of the biggest schools in the state, with his class was over 1,000 in his class, and so the big kids were playing at that school, and he wasn't a big kid, and so he'd been sitting on the bench, and he was a good athlete, and, you know, loved the game. But I told him maybe you should focus on basketball, and so he left football, and his little brother, who was 4 years younger than him, was just at the beginning of junior high, and he left too, and they both started playing lacrosse. As you know, it wasn't the same time of the year, but as something that, you know, that didn't matter how big you are. I mean, it's nice to be big and strong and fast, but lacrosse was a great equalizer sport to me, and it's a great sport, and so they got involved in that, and there's, you know, my younger one's still in that sport. My older boy's in college and doing trying to get a degree and doing the college stuff.
Okay. And then, do you, I guess, just playing the game and seeing all the, you know, the lawsuits and everything that's been coming out, is there ever any worry just about, you know, maybe what effects down the line? I mean, obviously there's so much that is not understood about
Sure.
the brain. There's so much that's not understood about concussions. The brain's probably one of the biggest mysteries of the human body.
Yeah.
But do you ever worry about anything, about future stuff?
Yeah. You know, I think about things like that because you see it around you. You see former teammates that have died, and, you know, whatever they've died from, I don't know necessarily from a head injury, but, you know, you see people that are struggling, that are, you know, have dementia or whatever. Was it brought on by, their contact in football. So it's, when you look at it and dwell on it, it's scary, but you just move ahead and you hope that you won't be one of those. But it's nice to see that this attention's coming about, and people that are having problems, that they get the proper medical attention and whatever they can to work through that. And but I think once you're in that, you're sort of, I don't know that there's any reversal on that. You can slow it down maybe, but so I like to see that. I like this lawsuit has supposedly ended here. We'll see in another, I think, couple weeks when they're in this period. But there's money there to help. But there's a lot of people that are in that middle zone. If you're real bad, I think you're going to get all the help you need, because you really can't do stuff. But there's a group in there in the middle, which the ones that committed suicide, they you could sort of see things, but they were still functioning in society, and I think you can hold a job. But we need to make sure we hopefully don't let those get into move towards, especially if they're going to take their life and have depression and
I think that's one of the things I never knew. Junior Seahawks, he had committed suicide. He had traces of CTE, but he was bipolar. Yeah. Which could be very easily traced back to that.
Well, there's all kinds of stuff, and but the bottom line is the NFL can't argue that it doesn't do. They just can't argue that there's too many guys that, whether they had other issues and they were bipolar, well, football contributed to that, to their demise, in some form or fashion. At least that can be the, the possibility. So.
Okay. Cool. And then just what, I know you had said financial services. What is your official title now and the company that you're?
Okay, I work with Catalyst Financial Group, and I'm a financial advisor, certified financial planner, and we sell insurance, life insurance, disability, long-term care, and we also work with people on investments, any kind of retirement or just any kind of investment product.